Well, welcome to this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Good. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Polina Marinova Pompliano, a best-selling author of Hidden Genius, The Secret Ways of Thinking That Power the World's Most Successful People. In this episode, we explore how she built her brand from the ground up, creating a massive following based off of her wildly successful newsletter, The Profile, which focuses on the lives and minds of the world's trailblazers, uncovering their strategies and insights that have set them apart. We will also explore some of the more fascinating individuals she's profiled and break down actionable advice that you can apply to your own life and unlock your own hidden genius. So get ready for an inspiring and practical conversation you won't want to miss. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we engage with esteemed thought leaders and explore research-backed strategies and techniques that empower leaders at every level to achieve meaningful results that drive lasting change. Love to get started with just kind of your journey and what really initially sparked your passion for profiling extraordinary people, and how did that really evolve into the newsletter, The Profile?
Yeah, so I've been in journalism my whole life. Starting with, I worked on my high school newspaper, went to the University of Georgia. I was the editor in chief of the newspaper there, had some internships at CNN and USA Today, graduated college. It was a little winding path, but ultimately made it to Fortune magazine. And to me, Fortune was like the pinnacle of journalism. It was, the place that had broken the Enron story. Like, this is where I wanted to be. It's like deep investigative journalism, but also they did incredible profiles of business CEOs and business leaders. It was almost like Fortune created the celebrity CEO. Before they put, a Fortune 500 CEO on the cover, it really wasn't a thing. And so I got really engrossed with the idea of I want to learn from these people. I want to learn how to profile people. But that was more of just a personal passion of mine. That's not what I was doing at Fortune. At Fortune, I was not really writing profiles. I was more covering tech and venture capital and which company is buying which and things like that. So in 2017, I felt kind of in in a rut, maybe is the right way to put it, but I in my free time, I would read long form profiles of interesting people across industry. So maybe it was business, but maybe it was entertainment and sports and things like that. And so to me, it was always just like really interesting to learn the little quirks of someone that helps humanize them. And I think the best profiles are ones that humanize the person that they're trying to, because I think in today's society, especially somebody like a Melinda Gates and Elon Musk, a Richard Branson, they're almost kind of like godlike creatures with their own cult followings. How do you bring them back down, expose their flaws, expose like what makes them human so that we can learn from them? So in 2017, I started some email on the side that I would only send to friends and family, which was, hey guys, you know that I love reading long form profiles. I'm just going to make some like 7 or 8 profile recommendations that I read the week prior. And almost it would act almost as a conversation starter. So I would send it to my family and friends, and then we would talk about what we learned from these profiles. That thing that I started in February of 2017 as an email, and not even a newsletter, I didn't know what a newsletter was at the time, evolved into the profile, which is the newsletter slash media company I have today. But never once did I start it with the idea that I would one day quit my full time job at Fortune to work on this full time.
You had, in a different interview that I watched, you say, there's a difference between a great profile and an average one. And that's the difference between store-bought tomato sauce and your grandmother's sauce.
So, what's the difference between store bought tomato sauce and your grandmother's sauce? I learned this tomato sauce theory of profile writing from a senior editor at Fortune, and I wrote it down. I've never forgotten it. But basically, they both sauces may have the same ingredients. The difference is that your grandmother's sauce simmers all day long. So you spend time with it, you massage it, you stir it, you pay attention to it. It's like when you're writing a profile, you really, really need to hone in on every word, every attribute of this person. How does it come across? Is this an accurate portrayal of them? You're spending so much time, A, with the person, and B, with the actual article, that it simmers all day long. The simmering process is where I think the art of writing a profile is. And actually, Katie Weaver, who's a writer, used to be at GQ, now is at the New York Times. I heard a podcast she did once, and she said that the reason that humans are so like enthralled by watching something in slow motion is it because it allows the brain to take in all the details of the object they're seeing in slow motion. Same is true in profile writing. When you're reading a great profile, the writer has the ability to slow that person down so that you can take in all of their quirks and interesting habits and really understand them as a human versus like rushing through saying, he's a CEO at so and so company, here's what he's done. That doesn't really tell you a lot about the real person beyond just the job title. So that's what I aim to do when I profile someone, and that's also what I look for when I'm finding these profiles.
When you're right, and it's such a high quality profile that you give for these individuals, it helps you to understand the nuance and the details about the person. It really paints that picture fully. What's the difference between a profile and a biography?
Mm. Well, okay, so a profile is it's long form, so it's longer than your average article, and it's probably 1,500, 2,000 words, maybe a little longer even. But a biography is just here's the every single thing you need to know about this person, usually in a book. It's a similar process putting it together. I actually think it may be harder to write a profile because you have to be concise and where every word matters. You don't have the luxury of having chapter after chapter. And for really great profiles, the writer usually talks to, I don't know, 50 people, to everybody in that person's orbit. You don't just talk to them. Same goes for a biography. But I think a profile is a portrait that's still short form compared to a biography, but longer than your average article.
And I've heard you say before that it's a snapshot of what that person has done or going through right now, right? So it's up to this point where that could change. A biography, usually written at the end of someone's life, kind of showcasing the entire path or journey they've went down. But these snapshots are so great to see at certain points of time with the lessons they've learned, which, like you said, might change over time as they mature, age, and have other experiences.
Right, exactly. And I really, really enjoy reading profiles because, yeah, it is a snapshot of today. So depending on when it was written, you really get to see what was going on in their head at that time. I remember I was doing research for an article I was doing on a venture capital firm, and I was reading an old profile of Jeff Bezos, and I was reading it. And the way they described Jeff Bezos at the time and what he was doing was founder of Amazon, an online bookseller. And this was written in the 90s, late 90s. And I was like, wow, how crazy that Amazon used to be an online bookseller and now here it is. So it is cool when I'm doing research on someone, I try to read every profile that's been done on them just to get an idea of whether their mindset has changed, their business has changed, their outlook on life has changed, and it usually does. And that's, I think, a really well written profile isn't biased in that it tells you what to think of the person. I think it allows the reader to kind of come to a conclusion on their own.
Absolutely, and it shows through the quality of your writing that you really thoroughly enjoy what you're doing. You curate all the necessary resources. What I really love about the newsletter, and especially the dossiers, is not only does it give you a summary on the individual, but you curate the resources to read, to watch, to listen to, and your takeaway. So it makes it more actionable and practical. And what you stated before is that you start with that secondary research. Now you hope turns into primary research where you're
Yes.
interviewing that individual, but it's so much more likely you're going to get that interview if you put in the work beforehand, and they know that to be the case as well, like you mentioned with James Clear and some of the bigger names that you've interviewed.
Yeah, Charles, I cannot tell you the number of times I've backed my way into an interview because I've already written about that person through secondary research. So it was the case for James Clear. It was the case for Brandon Stanton, who is Humans of New York photographer. He had never done a proper interview before, and I had been trying for years to get him to do it with me, but he never responded until one day in 2020 I had already done a dossier. A dossier is something that it's like an in-depth snapshot or profile and research of an individual person. And so I put together, here's everything you can read about them, listen to them being on podcasts, things like that, or watch. So with him, I put this whole thing together. I sent it to him. I published it. I sent it to him, and I said, "Hey, uh, you know, this is my style. Please let me interview you." And he agreed, probably because he saw how I wrote, he saw the research that I had done, and probably also my annoying persistence to get him to do it. But you also just never know. Like, I'm still trying to get an interview with him, but a nice surprise was when I did a dossier on Dwayne The Rock Johnson. I tweeted it, I tagged him, and then he responded. How he saw it in all his mentions, I have no clue, but he saw it. And not only did he see it, he took that article, he liked it, he put it on his Facebook, his Instagram, he tweeted it multiple times. I was like, no amount of marketing budget would get me this sort of exposure, but he did it for free because he genuinely enjoyed the quality of the work. So I really do think if you want to get to someone, you have to do the work up front to show them what you are capable of doing. I heard David Perel say one time, every single thing you put out into the world is a vehicle for serendipity. So you never know. That podcast you did, that article you wrote, that tweet you sent, you don't know whose eyes it's going to land in front of. And if it's high quality, it might like get forwarded to the right person and they may see it. So it's like, if you look at the world through that lens of every single thing I put out there is a vehicle for serendipity, you will become luckier.
I love that quote, and you're right. I've had that same experience myself with a lot of notable names. A lot of them say no, but putting in the work beforehand, even though the outcome is uncertain, is essential because in this day and age, with AI, with technology, with so much content out there, that it's really hard to distinguish yourself or your brand, which you've done very well. And I think it starts with what you say is kind of the secret to your success. Focus on delivering consistent, high quality content. That's where miracles happen because nothing in life is guaranteed.
Right. I love that quote by Rita Hoffman, who said that basically trust equals consistency plus time. If you are consistent over a long period of time, trust is inevitable. And I've taken that to apply it to my personal life, my professional life, my business life, like everything. And it is that I make a promise to the reader, to my partner, to my kids. And that promise, I know that I will fulfill it if I've made that promise. And I think the way I've built my business is based on that formula. Since February of 2017, when I started publishing the profile, I have not missed a single week. And that is not because I'm a workaholic or I'm insane or I don't take breaks. It's because I know that consistency leads to trust over a long period of time. Right now, I have 7 years to show of week after week of consistency. Maybe they haven't all been great, but I have sent that email every single Sunday and you've gotten it in your email every single Sunday. So, what that tells the subscriber is that I'm not going anywhere. If you back me financially with your dollars, I will not take your money and run off and you never see the email again. I will deliver on what I promise. And I think it's the same with companies and consumers. We trust Amazon because it gets delivered usually on time consistently. It's something that the future is always uncertain, but the way you can create some sort of certainty for yourself and the people you interact with is trying to be consistent and deliver on what you promised over a long period of time.
Absolutely correct. It's playing the long game, and there's no hacks, there's no shortcuts. But like you said, trust is established over time if you're consistent throughout that period of time. And you've definitely done so. And let's get into this great book, Hidden Genius. And after years of profiling thousands of fascinating people, you ask yourself the question, what distinguishes the great from the truly exceptional? And you underscore that they don't use tricks, they don't use hacks to achieve the greatness. And you wanted to share some practical ways for the reader to kind of take their mindsets, their hidden genius, and perhaps use them in their own life. But you wanted to make an important distinction because a lot of books are like this, where they just kind of hero worship or idolize people. And for you, writing this book was more about learning, not idolizing, correct?
Yes. Yes. I distinguish between learning and idolizing because I say that we are like a society with a wandering eye. So we're always like, "Ooh, that person has it. They got it down. Like that's who I want to admire and put on a pedestal and try to copy one for one." When I was writing the book and when I write my profiles, I always in the back of my head think, this person's life is not perfect. It's probably actually far from it, very far from it. The public perception rarely matches the private perception. Right now, Martha Stewart, there's a new documentary on Netflix on Martha Stewart. Oh my God. Like, as her career success was skyrocketing, her personal life was just completely in the dumpster. And she's promoting her weddings book, yet her marriage is falling apart. And it's like, if you look at her, because her entire brand is her name, her image, you are like, wow, she's the perfect hostess. She has the perfect life. But then you dig a little deeper and you're like, oh my God, this is not what I want for myself at all. So I wrote the book and I included that particular part in the introduction because I wanted people to read it as, look at all the different paths you could take, but know that these are not perfect people. They're often very imperfect people who appear that they have figured out some small thing in their life. And my thing is, I've interviewed people like Melinda Gates and Richard Branson, but I never, never, never idolized those people. I knew when I was talking to Melinda Gates and when the whole situation was happening at the time, people were admiring their relationship, her and Bill Gates. They were saying relationship goals, all this stuff. And then you realize their marriage was falling apart and they got divorced. You cannot judge this idea of someone based on who you want them to be or how they appear in public. So, yeah, like maybe you want to be some of these people 10% of the time. You don't want to be them 100% of the time. So, I really do think that there is something to learn from even the most imperfect people.
And you mentioned too that idolizing traps you into imitating perfect versions of imperfect people, right? And learning instead allows you to observe, synthesize, keep your authenticity, and pave your own path, which is really healthier as well. Because, like you said, a person's life is never linear. You don't see the other parts of their life, like you were mentioning with Martha Stewart, that just parts of their life that you wouldn't want to imitate and be a part of your life and make those, same missteps and sacrifices that they just don't show. And I think there's a lot of learning that can be had by people if they look at their whole life in their entirety instead of just looking at that one part of their life they're willing to show the world.
Exactly. And you just have to ask yourself, anytime you find yourself idolizing someone, you have to ask yourself, like, am I willing to make the same mistakes, make the same sacrifices? Maybe you don't see your kids for years on end so you could focus on your career, things like that. It's like, do you want that to be your life? And if not, it's totally fine to take small parts of their success and apply it to your own life, but don't like idolize them one for one. Just that's the model for success.
Well, let's move into creativity because a lot of leaders struggle with this. They think it's something either you're born with or you're not born with. And that's just simply not the case. I've had other interviewees here on the podcast that say, it's something that you can build. It's a muscle. And you have a great story in the book, Grant Achatz with Alinea, and how he's a creative genius, but it's not something that he was born with. It was something that he
Right.
worked hard to develop.
Yes. And I think approaching creativity as a skill is so liberating because it's not just either you're creative or you're not creative. It's like something you can cultivate. Grant Achatz is a fascinating figure because he built, Alinea into the number one restaurant in the world at one point. And it's this innovative, cutting edge restaurant where he has to take a lot of risks And he has to, at the same time, fight complacency. And he has to be constantly innovating and being creative and things like that. I share a few techniques in the book, but one of them is he knows that creativity is basically connecting the unconnected. Connecting the unconnected is something that Steve Jobs of Apple also talked about a lot. It's the idea that you can be very creative when you take ideas from multiple disciplines and tie them together and in disciplines that may not have anything to do with each other. So for example, his discipline is food. It's dining, the restaurant. What could he learn, though, from music or storytelling or art? And he incorporates those elements into the dining experience, and it is magical. It creates magic because he's not stuck to how things should be and how things have always been done. So, for example, he will go to a museum, see a large scale painting, and say, wow, that is beautiful. I want to eat off of that. So he brings that into the restaurant experience, makes his team create a tablecloth that looks like a piece of art that people can eat off of. Then he will be listening to a song from Rage by the Machine, and he'll be like, whoa, look at all these peaks and valleys in this song. Like, how can I recreate that and incorporate that into the dining experience? So suddenly, it's not just dinner, it's a story. There's peaks, there's valleys, there's a climax, there's all these things he weaves in where when you walk into his restaurant, you're not going to dinner, you're going to like a show. You're going to be entertained. So it's things like that where I'm really inspired by a technique like that. And I'm constantly asking myself when I'm walking down the street, I'm like, how can I look at the world through a lens of humans? So behind everything, there is always a human. So during the pandemic, I was walking down the street in New York City. I saw all these shut down businesses. My mind didn't go, oh, I wonder when they'll open. Oh, I wonder like what happened. My mind goes, who is the human behind that business and how are they feeling right now? Like it is immediate. With Grant, he says he looks at the world through a kaleidoscope of food. So everything he sees, he's like, how can I incorporate that into the dining experience? And most impressively for him, he at one point, the best chef in the world gets stage 4 tongue cancer, and he loses his ability to taste food. How insane is that? So it happens because you have taste buds on the tongue. But his point was that actually your eyes do a lot for you. The smell does a lot for how a food tastes. So he started experimenting with, okay, can we visually make a food look one way, but then taste a different way, smell a different way? It messes with your senses and perception of the world. That's a level of creativity for a chef who just lost his sense of taste in the mouth to be able to create his best menu yet. Incredible, incredible creativity. But it just shows that creativity is a product of constantly thinking about how you can incorporate these elements into your world and also being willing to take risks constantly in order to fight off complacency.
Well, and just to give more background on Alinea, what you stated is one third laboratory, one third sensorium, and one third theater. A guest is served 17 to 19 courses, a meal structure that kind of echoes the effects of chapters in a book. And its
Yes.
most iconic dishes over the years have been a pillow of nutmeg air, a black truffle explosion, and an edible helium filled floating balloon. That's
Like, that doesn't sound like food,
no.
right? Like, that sounds like an experience. And one more point about that is he's the helium balloon. He's constantly asking himself, "Why? Why do we do it like this?" He still approaches food like somebody with fresh eyes, which is so hard to do when you've been in this industry for so long. But by constantly asking why, you end up at this point where you're like, "Well, I don't know why." For him, it was, "Why are we why do humans, when they sit down to eat, usually eating with a fork and a knife and like making this motion, which for those of you listening, I'm putting my hand down to my plate and to my mouth." He's like, what if we just completely blow that up? No forks, no knives, no motion of hand to mouth. So he created this helium balloon where it floats to you and you have to use your mouth to eat it. incredibly innovative. He disrupted the very act of how you eat, not what you eat. So I think that that's truly revolutionary. And most people who think they're original thinkers aren't really. He is an original thinker.
Well, like you said too, it's connecting the unconnected, and he does it very well. He even mentioned, you mentioned in the book too, that he saw some dangling red beaded earrings. And that same night, he took that, put it on a sheet of paper, sketched out an idea, and had a new dish of an edible string of food with touches of red to mimic those earrings. So it's connecting the unconnected, and it's kind of exercising this creativity muscle because it's
Yeah.
not something you're born with, but he does a brilliant job of trying to see those things in everyday life and bring them back into the restaurant.
Exactly, exactly. Like, how do earrings make it into a dish? I don't know, but he's constantly on the hunt for new ideas. And I think if we approach our lives like that, you just start noticing every single thing. You'll be surprised at how many ideas come to you, which is why I always carry on like a tiny notebook with me just to jot things down. I don't know where and what it may lead me to, but it's good to record them in case I need an idea in the future.
I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.